I'll show you a simple way to remove and install scooter or motorcycle front wheel bearings in this video. You'll need to remove the front wheel for access to the bearings, and then you will probably have a seal in the way on at least one side of the wheel. You can use a seal puller to remove the seal, or it can be pried out with a small wrench. Now you should be able to see a bearing on each side of the wheel. You can use a bearing puller to remove the bearings, and I'll put a link in the description showing that, but the job can also be done with a punch and hammer. Find a punch that fits through the center of the bearings. Even a piece of steel rod or a long bolt could work. Slide it into one wheel bearing and toward the rear of the other, and look for a lip that it will catch on. Usually the spacer in between the two bearings doesn't end up perfectly centered, so find the spot where you can make the most contact with the back side of the bearing. Hold the punch there and keep a little pressure on it so it goes toward the ledge that you just found, then hit the punch with a hammer to drive out the bearing. Just be careful not to damage your wheel or put any pressure on the brake disc if you still have that attached. The bearing will usually come out pretty easily with a few hits, and you can remove the spacer that sits in there as well. Now you should have much easier access to the back of the other bearing to drive it out. Find a larger punch or rod that won't fit through its center, and then hammer it out. Clean the bearing seats and the rest of the inside of the wheel and make sure there isn't any damage to the seats. Clean the spacer as well. Find a socket that closely matches the outer race of the bearing, but is just slightly smaller so it won't get stuck in the wheel. You'll be using it later for the installation. You can also use a bearing driver if you have one. Whatever you choose, it needs to make contact only with the outer race because you don't want to put pressure on the center of the new bearings. Before installation, I like to heat the center of the wheel with a heat gun. This makes the wheel expand a little and it can help the bearings go in with less effort. Wear gloves that will protect you from burns. You can also cool the new bearings with freeze spray or an air duster held upside down, or just put them in the freezer at least an hour before you plan to install them. This helps to contract the bearing for an easier installation. Heating and cooling is optional, but may reduce stress on your new bearings. When you're ready, place the bearing into the wheel, trying to keep it straight in the bore. Then use the socket or tool that you chose earlier and drive the bearing in. It should stop against the ledge in the wheel when it's done. You could also opt to press the bearing in if you have access to a press. Turn the wheel over and repeat the heating and cooling process of the wheel and bearing if you wish. Place the spacer inside of the wheel so its center aligns with the center of the installed wheel bearing. Now put the bearing into the wheel as straight as you can and drive it in just like you did with the last one. Keep an eye on the spacer as you go to make sure it stays in line with both bearings. You can use the punch or other tool from removal to move it a little if needed. Once the bearing is up against the stop in the wheel, let it cool off if you heated it. Turn the center of the bearings by hand or put the wheel on an axle and spin it. The bearings should turn easily and quietly. If not, you may have driven the bearings in too hard or damaged them. Put a little wheel bearing grease on the inside lip of any new seals and install them by pushing them in by hand. You may also need to use a socket or seal driver to finish tapping them in. That's all there is to it. No specialty tools required. Please like the video if it was interesting or helpful, and thank you for watching.